Good afternoon and welcome to the IISS class. My name is Bryce Campbell. I'm the Managing Director of our office here. I imagine we'll have a few people trickling in with their ice cream. We'll go ahead and get started since you are all here and we have so much to talk about. We're here today to talk about the current situation in Nigeria, focusing largely on the threat posed by Boko Haram. It's sort of an odd time for Nigeria. It's been a great year economically, hosting the World Economic Forum, passing South Africa as the largest economy in Africa, advancing to the knockout rounds of World Cup, losing respectively to France. It's been a good year on that front. But 3 months ago, we also had the horrible incident of the schoolgirls being kidnapped in Chibok. And there are still roughly 220 of those girls in captivity, and much remains to be done. In other ways, in other terms of the violence and growing and continuing threats being posed by the group. Luckily for us, we are joined by my colleague from our London office, Virginia Comolli, and she is here to share her insights based on her recent book research. You can learn more about that later. You can also, if you're interested in Virginia's wider work, you can also pick up her last Adelphi book on the back about drugs and crime. I encourage you to take a look at that at the back of the room at the end of the event. But on to Nigeria and Virginia. So Virginia joined the IISS in 2006 as part of the military balance team conducting research on sub-Saharan Africa. Between 2007 and 2012, she was the research analyst and assistant to the director of transnational threats and political risk. She worked on projects looking at a wide variety of security issues, including international terrorism, radicalization, organized crime and drugs, conflict, cybersecurity, and energy security. And in this capacity, she was temporarily seconded to the UK Ministry of Justice as an expert analyst. Between 2012 and 2014, she held the position of Research Associate for Transnational Threats to the IISS, with a responsibility for research on transnational organized crime, extremism, and security threats in West Africa and Sahel. And she is now the Research Fellow for Security and Development, and again, is based in our London office. So I will turn the floor over to Virginia, and she'll give about 15 minutes worth of remarks, and then we will turn to the floor for an extensive Q&A. Virginia?
Well, thank you very much, Bryce, and thank you, everyone, for taking the time out of your schedules today to join me and the crowd to discuss Nigeria and the security situation, especially in the northeast of the country. What I'd like to do today is to first give a little introduction about the security and geopolitical context of Nigeria. I will say a few words about Boko Haram's background and how it emerged and evolved. And although I appreciate that a good number of you in the audience are quite familiar with the group, so please bear with me. But then really I'd like to move on to the Chibok incident and what that meant, and also the role played by foreign partners and the way US, UK, and others have tried to offer their support to Nigeria, and what that really means just outside the African continent. Well, Nigeria, from the point of view of security analysts like myself, is a very interesting case study. It's a very complex country. It's the most populous country in Africa. Half of the West African population is actually in Nigeria. It's a very diverse society with 250 different ethnic groups and languages, and the population roughly divided between Christian and Muslims. As Bryce alluded to, as of this year, Nigeria is the #1 economy in sub-Saharan Africa, and is also the African #1 oil producer. However, in spite of all these encouraging facts, there are over 60% of Nigerian population lives in absolute poverty. And the life expectancy is about 20 years lower than the world average. So there are still lots of improvements that need to be implemented. And of course, most of us will have heard stories about corruption, and of course Nigeria fares quite badly on the Transparency International Corruption Index. Nigeria is also host of a number of armed groups, some like Boko Haram, ideologically, in the main ideologically motivated. Others, especially the groups in the Niger Delta, are driven by economic gain. And a host of others, and several purely criminal gangs. Boko Haram is possibly the most active and the longest running Islamist group that is currently present in West Africa. It's been responsible for over 5,000, well over 5,000 deaths since it launched an insurgency against the Nigerian state in 2010, which has prompted the largest military deployment since the Nigerian civil war. Boko Haram was established in 2002 as a very isolated community based on ultra-Salafist principles in Yobe State, and the original members really looked at the Taliban as the societal model to which they should aspire. The first few years were characterized by very low levels of violent activities. The members would not mix with the mainstream Muslims, and they were very critical of the corrupt government and also northern religious leaders. As I said, the first few years were fairly peaceful, and the groups actually went more or less underground. At this point, the group was led by a very charismatic preacher, Mohammed Yusuf, and he was able, through his rhetoric, but also by offering microfinancing programs, to recruit people from northern Nigeria, but also from neighboring countries. People who from Niger, Chad, and Cameroon would travel to northern Nigeria to listen to his sermons. Also, they would also take money from him, and then they would use that money to set up small businesses. Things changed very dramatically in 2009 with the Battle of Maiduguri, where many hundreds of members were killed, and Mohammed Yusuf, the leader, was also killed in an extrajudicial execution by the police. And we can talk more about the events, and I don't think we need to go into that right now. But about a year later, in 2010, when the group re-emerged, it was now led by Yusuf's second in command, Abducted, and this was really a major turning point for the group. Abducted was a much more radical and violent individual, and it was at this point that the group embarked on this insurgency campaign aimed at Islamizing Nigeria. And while the group remained in the main an inward-looking group focused on its Nigerian agenda, over time the links between the group and Al-Qaeda in Islamic Maghreb, or the group and Al-Shabaab, became more evident. In the sense that there were connections between fighters and those groups, people that traveled from Nigeria to AQIM camps and also Al-Shabaab's camps to receive training. They also receive funding and weapons. And also it's possible to, by looking at the trajectory that Boko Haram has taken, to see how the attacks have become more sophisticated, and many so security practitioners would agree that this is an indication that some foreign influence was taking place. And also, when Boko Haram launched its first ever suicide attack, the first in the history of Nigeria, it was pretty clear that there was some foreign influence there from Al-Qaeda that made that possible. We can talk more about the details of some of the key attacks later. What I think is very important from especially a Western or non-Nigeria point of view is the adoption of kidnapping. And this was also a major turning point, which for some times was something that only Boko Haram's splinter group Ansarus would carry out. But over time, Boko Haram proper also began kidnapping people. There were different types of kidnapping taking place. High-profile Nigerians, in order to extort money, they would kidnap women to be used as bushwives, basically. And also they began kidnapping foreigners, such as various people kidnapped in Cameroon. Over time, the funding of Boko Haram has changed, which also indicates that there is a pretty large criminal element within the group. I think that should not be forgotten. As most insurgencies, Boko Haram is not a monolithic group. There is a core that is very much ideologically motivated, but there are lots of people on the ground who are motivated by opportunistic reasons. And so over time we've seen an increase in the number of bank robberies and racketeering, intimidation, car snatching, smuggling, and so on and so forth. Boko Haram has been, I would say, in the main, hasn't received in the main much international attention, with the exception of the kidnappings of foreigners, and more recently the Chibok incident, where in mid-April nearly 300 girls were abducted. What happened after the incident was quite chaotic. Contrasting messages were coming out of the Nigerian government in terms of the number of girls that were missing, and the Nigerian government has been heavily criticized for the lack of immediate and effective action to secure the release of the girls. And this, of course, as we know, has led to protests across Nigeria, but also across the world, online and in the real world, under the banner of Bring Back Our Girls. And I think this was a very significant development because really brought home to President Jonathan that his reputation was really, it's been strongly damaged by this incident. And when I think while the Chibok attack has, of course, galvanized international attention, many other attacks took place at the time. On the same day, there was an attack in Abuja, the capital of Nigeria. A couple of weeks later, another attack again in Abuja, quite close to the first one. Recently, we had another attack also in Abuja and some explosions in Lagos. And also mass killings have not stopped. I've seen pictures of squares in northeastern Nigeria covered in burned bodies, and something that you don't see reported in the mainstream media. Unfortunately, these high levels of violence have continued in Nigeria, alongside the more abductions of women and girls in the north. But what has the government done, the Nigerian government? I mean, from the very beginning, the government has reacted by deploying troops to the region, especially from 2004. And between 2011 and between 2011 and the summer of last year, Joint Task Force Operation Restore Order, which was a multi-agency force led by the Nigerian Army, was deployed to a number of northern states. I think it's very important to look at the government response, because the way the government has dealt in a very heavy-handed way with Boko Haram has very much influenced the trajectory that the group has taken, and very much attacks were carried out in retaliation for government actions. The military has been very criticized for its approach. There have been several reports by Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International and others, indicating the high numbers of extrajudicial killings, tortures, people who had their house burned, and people being killed, rapes and looting, and you name it. So a state of emergency was first declared in a number of areas in the north for the first half of 2012, and a more substantial one was declared in May of 2013 in Borno, Yobe, and Adamawa in the northeast of the country, which has been renewed and is currently in place. Although the Joint Task Force is no longer running the counter-insurgency operation, but a new army division was put in place in the summer of last year. I don't want to be completely negative vis-a-vis Nigeria's approach. The military have achieved some success, lots of arrests, lots of killings of militants, and aerial targeting has been used very successfully to target Boko Haram militants in the northeast. And the strategic role of aerial targeting has been also understood by Boko Haram themselves, and in fact they attack the Air Force base in Maiduguri in December of last year, which put the aerial operation hold for a little while. As I said, the use of the military has been quite criticized, and has been very problematic. Over the past few years, the defense budget has been increased substantially, but a few questions still remain, especially as to whether soldiers receive adequate salaries and that soldiers receive adequate equipment. And that's not always the case. Often the money is misused, and the resentment among the ranks is also increasing. And a few weeks ago we saw some soldiers in Borno State shooting at the convoy of one of their commanders, which I think is a very concerning development. Given the Nigerian government inability to effectively deal with the Chibok crisis, a number of countries have offered their support: the UK, the US, France, China, Canada, Israel, and you name them. And these forms of support have come especially in the form of surveillance and reconnaissance aircrafts, intelligence, satellite imagery, and also by sending military and intelligence advisors to Nigeria. There were also 2 international summits in France in May, and then a follow-up in London in June, where a number of partners from the region, so Nigeria's neighbors plus some Western partners, agreed on a regional intelligence unit with the support of the West to increase intelligence cooperation in the fight against Boko Haram. However, I would say, I think it's important to note that the cooperation between Western countries, perhaps focus more on the US now, and a country like Nigeria is not always an easy one. The United States, and also the UK is a very important partner in this case, has been involved in training the Nigerian military for a number of years. And of course, and the cooperation is not limited to the military, but the US government engages with Nigeria in terms of on issues related to security, but also governance and transparency and agriculture and trade and so on and so forth. However, lots of challenges are part of this relationship. It's not always possible to fully share intelligence when your partner doesn't share the same level of respect for human rights that you do. So some limitations have to be put in place. And if you also look at the history of cooperation between the 2 countries, sometimes military training had to be suspended, exactly for this same reason, when there was no enough assurance on the Nigerian level that training would be used in full respect of human rights. So why is Nigeria so important? And of course, it's a key country in Africa. But why should the US or the West be concerned with what is happening in northern Nigeria and with Boko Haram in particular? I know there are some people who would claim that Boko Haram may pose a direct threat to the US. I personally don't see it that way. I don't think there is a direct threat to the US or to Europe, in spite of some very strong anti-Western, anti-US rhetoric that's being put forward by Shekau in his messages. What I think is concerning is that we've already seen a level of infiltration in neighboring countries that have been used from the early days of Boko Haram's emergence to recruit members, but also to seek refuge from Nigerian military actions. And of course, there are repercussions for those countries. Let's not forget that neighboring Niger, Chad, and Cameroon are also fairly poor countries, and they share similar levels of unemployment and poverty and underdevelopment, and also food insecurity that are typical of areas of northeastern Nigeria, and therefore the receiving communities of the thousands of refugees coming from Nigeria are put under considerable strain, and there is a humanitarian problem there. The other reason why the West should indeed be concerned is because the targeting of foreign nationals has become a more present feature of the group's activities. And we have seen kidnappings in Nigeria and Cameroon, both by Boko Haram and its splinter group, Ansaru. And also there is a targeting of Western commercial interests in the region, so not just national. And finally, I think Africa as a whole is a growing consumer market. It's one that China and India are tapping into, and also the US and Europe cannot afford to stay behind with this.
Great, thank you very much for that, Virginia. It's a really good recap of how we got to where we are at this point in Nigeria with this particular threat. I guess one question that jumps to my mind is that there have been reports of vigilante groups sort of springing up in northeast Nigeria as a response. Is that a growing concern? Is that a possible tool for the Nigerian government to work with? And what are the odds of similar developments taking place in the neighboring countries with the spillover of these activities there? And could that further embroil the entire region?
Yes, I think, okay, the emergence of vigilantes. Okay, vigilantes are quite a common feature in Nigeria. But the emergence of vigilantes who self-styled as the civilian JTF, the Civilian Joint Task Force, is a clear example of the side effects of government actions. When the state of emergency was put in place in May 2013, government forces would go around and round up innocent, young men, and they would be targeted and wrongly accused of being part of Boko Haram. So some of these young men, they got tired of being wrongly targeted, and they decide to themselves go and find the real Boko Haram and point them out to the military. What happened here is that at the very beginning they were not very well organized, while over time we've seen over the past year they now have groups and units and sub-units, although they don't have firearms, and they have some machetes and knives and sticks and things like that. But they're much more organized now. But especially at the very beginning, I think they were seen as quite problematic, because you can only imagine you're driving around and some guys that stop you at a checkpoint, and you wonder why should I stop them? Why should I allow there's people without any formal authority to carry out a law enforcement role. So I think at the beginning the Nigerian military was also quite concerned with this. But over time they've come to support the civilian JTFs, and they've also encouraged the civilian population to support the CJTF in their actions. However, the civilian JTF's operations have also caused some retaliation by Boko Haram. Communities in which civilian JTFs are believed to be present have been targeted. Some churches have been targeted because there were some members of the civilian JTFs there during the service. And so I think this is an awful cycle of violence here that we are seeing with the civilian JTFs. One thing that is interesting and perhaps not often discussed is that these days the civilian JTFs also recruit women. They tend to be the wives or relatives of the male members, and they join the civilian JTFs because over time Boko Haram has started to employ women to smuggle weapons, because they are less likely to be seen as suspicious, and also because men cannot search women. And some Boko Haram male members themselves has disguised themselves with wearing female clothing to go undetected. So the use of women among the civilian JTFs has been encouraged, so these ladies can perform searches on female suspects. I think what you said about the possible emergence of civilian JTFs in the neighboring countries, that's an interesting point. However, I think that especially in the case of Niger and Chad, Cameroon is slightly different, I will say why. Boko Haram has been very smart in limiting the activities it carries out there, because they knew that they needed a safe haven, a place to which they could retreat. So it's not in Boko Haram's interest to upset the local authorities too much, because they don't want to attract attention. I said that Cameroon is slightly different because the number of skirmishes is higher there with the local forces, and also the kidnappings that have been taking place there. So I think that's something to watch.
I could keep going, but I should probably turn it over to the floor to ask you for questions. We've got a mic that will be coming around. If you could identify yourself and limit yourself to a question. But we'll start here in the middle.
I'm Tim Andrews from the State Department Bureau of Counterterrorism. Could you characterize your view on Boko Haram's recruitment field? Is it primarily Nigeria, primarily outside of Nigeria? And I'll take a part B, please. Whether most of the recruits are people who have been compelled or forced to join, or whether most of the recruits have joined because they've been incentivized to join, promised money, promised women, whatever the case may be. Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, let's check a couple more so we can do them all. Yeah, we'll right next to him, Ambassador Campbell.
Thank you very much. New to me was Mohammed Yusuf's providing of microbanking services. Now, does that continue? And have you seen any evidence of Boko Haram providing even rudimentary government services in the territory that it controls?
Great question. And we have another question here in the front. She likes to go a long way. Purpose, right?
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. I hate to dominate this whole state of questions, but I will. So 2 questions. The first is, I was wondering if you could shed a little light on some of these recent kidnappings. I'm not aware that they are kidnappings for money. It's not clear to me that they're kidnapping as wives. I've left a bit in the dark. And a separate question is about possible actions. What are, from your perspective, government responses from the U.S. government, and what do you assess is the receptiveness of the Nigerian government in terms of will to address the problem or will to receive outside help? Thanks.
Great. So we'll do another round of questions for sure. We were asked about the recruitment field for Boko Haram, any possible continuing microfinancing or any government structure in the space that Boko Haram controls, and then sort of motivation for kidnapping, for money, for bushwhaps, and then possible responses. Is the Nigerian government open to work in the U.S.? What has been proposed?
Cool. Yes. Okay. With regard to the first questions on nationality, I think the members come from Niger, Chad, Cameroon, Nigeria, and some from Sudan as well. So I think this would be the main countries. And why they join? Well, I think that these days quite large number of recruits are there, not so much for ideological reasons, but as a way of making a living. And I think the economic opportunism is a major drive. And I think, I don't want to emphasize too much the alleged poverty extremism link. I really don't want to do that. But I think that high levels of unemployment and low levels of education, coupled with the sentiment of feeling marginalized and having little political representation, I think that's a very dangerous mix. And it might make the opportunity of joining a group such as Boko Haram look quite appealing as a way of earning money, channeling grievances, and getting some sort of status and sense of belonging, and we are part of a serious group and threatening one. So I think these days perhaps the new recruits are less ideologically motivated than they used to be. With regard to Yusuf and microfinancing, yeah, just to say a few extra words about that. I mean, Mohammed Yusuf was a very wealthy man. And what he did was to give small amounts of money to the unemployed people who would follow him, and they would normally use the money to set up small businesses, particularly running motorcycle taxis. And in fact, when Mohammed Yusuf's mansion was with search seized. Lots of those motorcycles were also found there. So that was a very good way of enticing new members, but also of generating some revenues, because a percentage of the revenue would go back into the group's coffers, and also the members were expected to pay a small amount of a membership fee. I don't really think that this continues to this day, and Shekau, not many people have ever seen him, but he relies on lieutenants who travel across the country and give order and give money. But I think the money is used to buy weapons and to stage the attacks and various operations. I don't think there are any they're setting up any businesses. But that's I don't have latest details or information on this, but that's my sense. In terms of governance structure, I've been thinking about that quite a bit, because when President Jonathan declared the state of emergency in May last year, he made it clear that there was a part of Borno State in which the Nigerian government has lost territorial control, and in fact the Nigerian government had been the Nigerian flag had been removed and all of that. And the fact that Boko Haram at that point was able to set up harems and to keep people in their camps, I think that tells me that they had enough power to be able to control communities in that sense. But I don't know. But in terms of performing something similar as offering the forms of governance, I'm not entirely sure, because when we talk about alternative forms of governance, it reminds me of some other work I do, where especially in some Central and South American countries, organized criminals go in and they set up a welfare system, they build schools, they build roads, and so on and so forth, and they administer some forms of justice as well. And I don't really see Boko Haram doing much of this, or building schools, or especially schools. That was a bad example. Yes. Kidnapping. Why did they kidnap the girls? I wouldn't, to be honest, I wouldn't describe the Chibok incident as kidnapping, in the sense that I think the operation, which probably resulted in much more international attention than Shekau could ever have imagined. I think it was a way of acquiring some bargaining power. I think for some time the Nigerian government has adopted this very ill-taught practice of abducting the wives and children of Boko Haram militants, even though these women or children may be completely oblivious of their husbands or fathers' whereabouts or activities. But they would harass these women and children and could keep them in jail for months on end, in the hope to put some pressure on Boko Haram so that the militants would come forward. And normally that doesn't happen. And even one of the wives of Shekau was believed to be held captive by the security forces. So, and in the past, during previous kidnappings, there had been a request for a prisoner exchange, where Boko Haram demanded or offered to release some of the people in exchange for militants or family members. So I think this is part of that trend. And also it was a way, once again, to put the Nigerian government in a very bad light and to humiliate President Jonathan, and which is something that Shekau quite enjoys doing. Yes, possible actions. That's I was dreading this question. I've been talking about this for some time to various people, and some often say, "Oh, why don't we just send special forces and rescue the girls?" And of course that's a very simplistic way, which I think a US or UK or Western-led operation in Nigeria is not going to bring any results. I mean, Nigeria is a sovereign state; they should be dealing with the problem themselves. That we are talking about a very difficult terrain, and the Nigerians are the ones who know that terrain best. And also having a Western led operation to target a group that is so strongly against Western influence and what they see as neo-colonial approach to their country, and the Western powers trying to interfere with African affairs. That would just fuel that resentment and just, I think, perhaps it would facilitate additional recruitment, because it would just a way of saying, see, that's what the Westerners are trying to do, trying to come here and then bring, their forces. So I think that's very tricky. There's been, of course, discussion about a negotiation, and I understand that behind the scenes there have been talks about an exchange. I think that is also quite difficult. I don't know to what extent Shekau can be trusted. So I'm not sure about that. The other possibility is the one of paying a ransom for the girls, which is something that the Nigerian government may be considering. Of course, with the involvement of countries such as the US, the UK, who are strongly against paying ransoms. I don't think the Nigerian government can do that, especially as long as so much international attention is being paid to this incident. On how receptive is the Nigerian government? Well, I think on paper, officially, they welcome various offers of support. In a way, I was surprised that they were they welcome an offer of support from Israel. And I think although the Israelis are quite good and have good reputation in counter-terrorism, I think bringing a Jewish force in northern Nigeria, I don't know, I'm very uncomfortable with that idea. I think it might spark additional violence. So I understand I'm listing all the things that I don't think would work. So I think, well, the US has advisors on the ground, and intelligence is being shared to a point, I understand, and I'm not sure that much more can be done. I think at the bottom of this is capacity building. I think that's the main. It probably doesn't help that much with this incident, but on a more general level, I think the most feasible approach is the one that is based on capacity building and increasing resilience on the ground, and when it perhaps an approach that moves away from aid, which is by and large unsustainable, but focuses on increasing capabilities in Nigeria.
Great, let's do another round of questions. We've got one at the back and two more at the front.
Hi, my name is Alex Sanchez. I'm a senior fellow at a small think tank over in the Front Circle. My question has to do with funding of Boko Haram. You mentioned very briefly that they do robberies, racketeering. I mean, in the news we hear that they're involved in everything from arms smuggling to drug trafficking, using trafficking cocaine coming from Latin America. I've heard commentaries about them being involved in oil, stealing oil from the Nigerian government, from the pipelines, and selling that. I'm just wondering, from your research, what kind of funding does this organization use? You mentioned that it's a very non-monolithic organization. There are little factions here and there, but what sorts of funding have you heard about? Thank you.
We've got two more.
Hi, my name is Miranda, and I'm a student at Harvard Kennedy School. My first question is about the increased reach and spread of Boko Haram, not just attacks in Abuja, but also claiming attacks in Lagos, and what do you think is behind the increased reach? And a second question about the CGTF and its connection, and what do you think about its connections to the politics of the region and potential for being leveraged in support of political ends as well?
Thank you, great presentation. My name is Reyes Cole, I work for the Marine Corps. My question is for counterinsurgency, it's a whole of government response. So what is the Nigerian government doing other than military response to counter this insurgency?
Great.
Yeah.
You ready? have one more.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for this as well. My name is Efera, so I'm Nigerian. My question is there sympathy among the Nigerians in that region towards this group? And secondly, what is the role of the Islamic religious leaders in terms of, stopping this group? And thirdly, it sounds like corruption was an instigating factor. How does it play? It seems they're very complicated.
I think that's a very accurate statement. That's a very complicated issue. But we have Virginia to explain.
Okay. Funding. I think Boko Haram has been very adaptable over time, and they've adopted different ways of raising funds. As I said, I talked about the initial microfinancing and the businesses. You're right in pointing out the various criminal activities, and also, the other sources of funds that are worth mentioning here, I think, are the kidnapping and sharing some of the ransom money with AQIM, and AQIM has been known for channeling some funds into the group. I've been reading somewhere, and I'm just reporting this because I haven't done any much cross-referencing, is about this source of funding whereby Boko Haram members engage in online scams, where they pretend to start relationships online with people until this victim sends some nude pictures or compromising pictures, and then they're being blackmailed. I'm going to look more into this option, but I just thought I would just report it. But again, so I think AQM, the kidnapping business, and criminal activities, I think are the main source of funding. In the past, the group has received support from some politicians and local businessmen who acted as financiers for the group. And this was very much true during the earlier phases, and perhaps up until 2007 or even 2009. But I think that government support these days is much limited, and this is in spite of the various accusations that parties throw at each other, and they always accuse one another of supporting Boko Haram, of being part of Boko Haram. This very unhelpful politicization of the issue. Yes, the attacks are now nationwide, and so why? Well, I think Boko Haram as a cell-based structures with cells more or less everywhere in the country, although their main area of operation is in the northeast of Nigeria. I think that by launching attacks outside their main areas, they signal to the government that they are a serious threat. They're not just something for the north to worry about. They have a nationwide reach, and they're also sending a very strong message of trying to humiliate the government when they stage an attack at the time of the World Economic Forum taking place in Abuja, and being able to stage 2 attacks in the capital within 2 weeks. I think that was pretty embarrassing for the Nigerian government. Having said that, I don't think that Boko Haram is in the near future going to be able to set up any substantial, or start any substantial operations in the south of the country for a number of reasons. One is that I don't believe they will be able to gain that public support that they enjoy in the northeast. The other is that it would be quite easy for locals in the south to spot the presence of people from the north. And I have some Nigerian friends that would tell me, if I see someone from the neighboring state next door, I would be able to spot that person that is not from here. So I think that's pretty true for the south as well. And the other reason why I don't think they'll be able to set up major operations in the south is because there are still a number of groups that are active in the Niger Delta. If you think about that part of the country, they've already made it clear in a number of occasions they will not tolerate any major incursions by Boko Haram in the Niger Delta region, which has its own host of problems. With regard of the civilian JTFs and political leverage, I'm not entirely sure what you meant.
Just reports that they've been mobilized by the governor in Borno State and has done attacks on rival politicians.
Yeah, I think, yes, sorry, of course. Yes, I think there is, of course, yes, because there have been reports indicating that Borno state government have been using civilian JTFs to target their political rivals. I think this is part of a broader trend that is quite common in a number of countries, and especially in northern Nigeria, at around the time of elections, for instance, for politicians to hire local thugs to basically act as their enforcer and intimidate their political opponents and rivals. So I think this is very much likely. However, in the case of Boko Haram, well, some of the earlier Boko Haram, started like that, only to later become a monster that those politicians were no longer able to control. So I think that it could become quite concerning if things spiral out of control. Non-military initiatives. Yes, although I've emphasized the use of the military in dealing with Boko Haram, the Nigerian government has been working on a national counter-terrorism strategy, which has been very much influenced by UK, US, and other countries' counter-terrorism strategy. And as you rightly said, this has to be a whole-of-government approach, and in fact, this new Nigerian strategy includes a softer approach, that's how they call them, that includes elements of counter-radicalization, de-radicalization, and strategic communication and public diplomacy. And I've been talking to, this comes under the Office of the National Security Advisor and the Counter-Terrorism Coordinator. And I think the counter-radicalization, de-radicalization programs, they seem quite good and aimed at schools and prisons, and also helping on giving mothers a tool to identify whether their sons are becoming more violent or radicalized. And there is the use of arts and sports and various activities to especially targeted at young men. However, resources for these programs are very limited, and there have been lots of delays also in recruiting people who would run those programs. And with regard to de-radicalization, which would take place primarily in prison, the number of convictions so far has been very, very low. The last numbers I have are from February 2014. There were only 40 convicted Boko Haram terrorists in total. And so I think those programs have yet to start. So there are no results to speak of yet. But yes, you're right in pointing out that it's not just the military, there's also the other side of things. Is Boko Haram receiving much public support in the north? It is receiving some support, and the people I've been talking to, like average common citizens, they often said that they were as afraid of Boko Haram as they were of the military there. And I think that, and in some of them they even said, well, we condemn Boko Haram's violence, but we kind of understand where they come from. And so I think there is an element of the support there, although the continuing attacks against the civilians, the kidnapping of women and children, that's really has alienated a large proportion of the population. So I think as they continue with this escalation of violence against average citizens, I think their support is going to suffer as a result. The role of religious leader. Well, Boko Haram has often identified some of the traditional religious leaders, such as Sultan of Sokoto, as their as their enemy, and they've often criticized Muslim leaders for not being strict enough and for not really embracing the true tenets of Islam, and so on and so forth, and from being too, I would say, modern or too close to the Nigerian government. So there has been an element of that. Of course, there is quite the tension between different religious organizations in Nigeria. I've been talking to CAN, the Christian Association of Nigeria, which is a very powerful umbrella organization that represents most, but not all, the Christian churches in Nigeria. And they are very critical of what the government is doing, and they feel marginalized, and they feel that the victims don't get any retribution. But then you go to the Central Mosque, and you go to the Council of Islamic Affairs, and you hear very similar complaints from the Muslim leaders as well. And so I think from that point of view, the government is not doing a very good job on either front. And corruption, yes, well, corruption unfortunately is a very pervasive feature here. And for instance, there were reports regarding recent arrest of Boko Haram members in which the people were not being prosecuted or were set free because they were the children of some prominent Nigerians, so their parents would basically buy their way out of jail. And I think the corruption that we might see these days is perhaps in the allocation of funds that should be devoted to the military and sell their salaries and the purchasing equipment, and the funds are being pocketed by the people, and they're not used for the right purposes, which of course creates strong sense of resentment among the military file.
Thank you for that, Virginia. Unfortunately, we're out of time, but that was an incredible overview of a very important space for all of us to watch, not least because there's a presidential election in early 2015, and as a town that's focused on presidential elections in 2016, the fact that they're doing it so much sooner just sort of highlights the importance of this being a really important thing for all of us to keep focused on. So I'd like to thank you all for coming here today. I don't know if there's any ice cream left downstairs, but you're welcome to it. There's also more coffee and cookies in the back. Please join me in thanking Virginia.